Hello, my name is Leanne Gibbs and I work in the School of Education at Charles Sturt University. This presentation reports on an Australian study of the emergence and development of leadership that supports children's rights and their access to high-quality early childhood education. This study was embedded in a larger ARC linkage study, Exemplary Early Childhood Educators at Work. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri and Dharawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live. I would also like to pay my respect to the elders, both past and present, and also emerging, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who are viewing this presentation. So, what about this study? Well, effective leadership is essential for the delivery of high-quality early childhood education. Effective leadership is enacted in Australian early childhood education settings within a complex and constantly changing landscape. In this complex environment, positional leaders are required to effectively lead and manage people and to implement reforms in policy, programs, and practice. Leadership practice is confounded by the presence of competing agendas within individual early childhood education sites. Such agendas include enabling parents' workforce participation, children's preparation for school, delivering a financial profit for owners and shareholders of businesses, and most importantly, the delivery of high-quality education and care to uphold children's rights. To be effective in their practice, positional leaders require comprehensive preparation for the multiple facets of the role. Yet there remain many barriers to holistic preparation for emerging and positional leader roles and for the practice of leading that is unique to early childhood education. Without early childhood leaders, the fundamental purpose of early childhood education may be subjugated, and therefore children's rights to high-quality early childhood education could be compromised. Leadership in early childhood education was originally linked to positional roles within early childhood education sites. It was enacted through specific traits and defined by centralised power. The chronology of definitions sees a transition from the individual heroic leader to a more dispersed and inclusive approach to leading. But definitions can be limiting, and the lack of a shared definition and theoretical foundations of early childhood education may constrain the emergence and development of leadership as a unique ECE proposition and as a socially just practice. Such leadership practice makes children's rights central to the provision of high-quality early childhood education. The issue of social justice central to early childhood education receives little attention in leadership research and scholarly discourse. Although early childhood education has experienced an increased focus on leadership research, there remains a gap in the existing research regarding the development of site-based early childhood education leadership, specifically leadership as a practice that upholds and ensures children's rights. The primary focus in this study was how do organisational practices enable and constrain the development of effective leading and leadership in educators with a central focus on children's rights. Two theoretical frames were used for the study: complexity leadership theory and the theory of practice architectures. The theories are similarly concerned with emergence, self-organisation in complex environments, universal leadership development, and interdependence of practices. Complexity leadership theory was used to initially position ECE leadership as a dynamic, emergent, and innovative practice within a complex environment. The theory of practice architectures was used as an analytical lens for the study. This analytical lens enabled me to be able to see what the practices of leading were and also to understand how those practices were enabled. The theory of practice architectures posits that human life is conducted in practices, and practices are made up of sayings, doings, and relatings that hang together to form a particular and distinct practice with an intention. In this study, the intention is identified as leading for children's rights. The practices of leading are therefore shaped, enabled, and constrained by the arrangements, being the cultural discursive, material economic, and social political arrangements within the site of the practice. In this context, practices are foundational to a type of leadership praxis that is driven by ethics, is morally committed, and founded by traditions and the history of a profession. This type of leadership praxis is foundational to high-quality early childhood education, where children's rights are paramount. Mini ethnographic case study was employed to investigate the emergence and development of leadership practice that ensures children's rights for access to high-quality education. Data collection was undertaken over 6 days within 3 sites. In the first instance, an observation tool was developed to identify participants who were displaying effective practices of leading and leadership. The tool mapped empirically determined practices of effective leadership with practices of complexity leadership and Quality Area 7 of the Australian National Quality Standards, that being focused on leadership and governance. It was also mapped to the theory of practice architectures. According to the facilitated observations and annotated field notes, 24 participants were found to be practicing effective leadership across 3 of the sites. Follow-up unstructured interviews investigated emerging themes relating to leadership. Another emergent method, the Dialogic Cafe, was conducted with groups of participants on 2 of the sites. The Dialogic Cafe is a type of free-form focus group where participants direct the conversation. After an initial provocation on leadership, participants pose questions of interest and then dialogue to create new ideas. The participants make graphic records of conversations and ideas for leadership development. In the final stage of the study, documents such as site policies, philosophy and vision, job descriptions, and material from rating and assessment reports of Quality Area 7 were collected and analysed. So who was involved? Well, the study was conducted with 3 exemplary early childhood education sites. This means that all sites had achieved a national quality standard rating of exceeding in all elements of all quality areas, indicating that the highest level of practice was achieved within the Australian legislated accreditation system. Sites had a similar level of complexity with regard to size, people, policy, and practice. The individual participants comprised 10 early childhood teachers, 3 diploma educators who were studying a Bachelor of Education, and they were greater than 50% towards achieving that qualification, and 8 diploma educators and 3 certificate educators. So the analysis. Well, data were analysed to examine how leading as a socially just practice emerged and developed within each ECE site. Interviews, field notes, and participant records of 2 dialogic cafes were analysed with the assistance of in vivo software. The first stage of data analysis identified the practices through the sayings, doings, and relatings of emerging and positional leaders within each site. Practices were identified through a children's rights frame of protection, provision for, and participation of children in early childhood education. Following the identification of practices, the theory of practice architectures was used to examine the cultural discursive, material economic and social political arrangements that shape the socially just leadership practices upholding the rights of children within each site. What did the study find? Well, study findings show that the cultural discursive, material economic and social political arrangements within each early childhood education site created the conditions for the emergence and development of effective leaders. The study confirmed that positional leaders influenced the quality of early childhood sites when they built collective visions, communicated well, were contextually literate and strategically competent. The study, however, revealed new insights into the emergence of leading and the practice of socially just leadership that upholds children's rights. Socially just leadership practices were found to be independent and were constantly reshaping to generate morally informed, purposeful leadership praxis. So if we look at the diagram in front of you, you can see on the left-hand side, we see the practices of socially just leading. And this is what upholds children's rights and creates a world where children are supported in their rights. And then what we see on the right-hand side are what actually enables those practices, those leading practices, and also constrains them. And we see in the practice architectures, the cultural discursive arrangements, the material economic arrangements, and the social political arrangements. This is what enables and constrains those practices of leading on the left-hand side. Some really important ones to note here are that the culture of trust, children's rights and well-being embedded in philosophies and common professional language really enables these practices of socially just leading. There are also material resources such as the physical spaces that respect children and adults. There are regulations, policy and funding which can at times seem constraining, but definitely work to uphold the rights of children and the leading of educators. There's also the social political, and these were the environments in which these educators were leading. There was an equal right to lead. There were formal leadership positions that people found really important so that they could improve their practices. There were equality of child and adult contributions, and these were valued. And there was respect for diversity and difference. There was also social justice embedded within organisational histories. These are the arrangements that enable the practices of socially just leading. Findings of the study suggest ECE organisations should look beyond individual leadership preparation for organisational success. There should be collective approaches to leadership preparation, and they could instead build on social justice knowledge to promote innovative thinking on funding, policy and practice for leadership praxis. Training and professional development should be accessed by both emerging and positional leaders and would ideally include a balance of administrative, adaptive and enabling approaches to leading. Overall, organisations could resist development that instructs emerging and positional leaders on unquestioning application of policy and standards and could instead prioritise the development of leadership praxis to build upon the social justice imperative of early childhood education. So where to from here? In My Planning is an international study that is around these concepts of socially just leading and leadership and on the emergence and cultivation of leadership within early childhood education. If you're interested in being a part of this or you're interested in collaborating on such a study, then please be in touch at the email address you see there. Thank you very much for sharing this 15 minutes with me, and I'll leave you with some follow-up reading and some references for this presentation. Thank you.